This is The Road Show, and I'm your host, David Warren. On today's program, we welcome back Jim Stovall, who's here to talk about the gift of giving. Welcome back, Jim.
It is always good to be with you. I feel like, a book or movie is not really out until I come on the road show and talk to you about it. So it's always fun. Thank you.
Amen to that, Jim. Thank you for saying that. You know, the last time you were here with us, you had just announced the $1.5 million gift that you gave our alma mater, Oral Roberts University, and that was in order to establish a full entrepreneurship program for the ORU students. So as we get going today, I'd like you to recap that story starting when you were an ORU student attending a chapel service. What year was that, by the way?
Yes, it started 40 years ago, and I am in a chapel service, which they do twice a week at Oral Roberts University. And our speaker for that particular service was a gentleman who ran a nonprofit organization in Africa digging water wells so that villages would have clean drinking water. And I don't really remember anything else about his talk other than that. And at the end of it, Oral Roberts, who was still the president then, got up and said, I think we ought to take up a collection to help this man with his work. And David, I thought that was a great idea, except for one thing. I only had $17 to my name, and it was all in my pocket. I had a $10 bill, a $5 bill, and two ones, and there wasn't any more coming anytime soon. That was what I had.
Okay.
Well, as the basket approaches me, I reach in there and get a $1 bill. And I'm just getting ready to throw it in the basket, and it's like a couple people away from me. And Oral got up again, and he said, "Stop." Boy, and when Oral said stop, the world stopped. And he said, "Somebody here needs to hear this. Either give your best and expect the best, or just keep your money because you'll need it." And David, that was a turning point in my life. I did one of the hardest things I've ever done. I put my $1 bill back, and I got out my $10 bill. And I took a deep breath, and I threw it in there. And then after chapel, I met Miss Crystal, and, we were going to go to lunch, and we had a date that evening. We weren't exactly a couple yet, if you know what I mean. So she said, "What'd you think of chapel?" I said, "I got good news, I got bad news. The good news is I helped that guy with his water wells. The bad news is we're getting ready to have a $7 date." Well, she was very gracious then, as she is now, and she said, "Why don't we just go for a walk and have dinner in the dining room here on campus," which I realized I can probably afford that. And we ended up on our walk in an empty lecture hall in the Graduate Center when she asked me a question that changed my life, second time that day. And she said, "What do you think we're going to do when we get out of college?" Well, there'd never really been a we before in any of our conversations, so I took that as a really positive sign. And I jumped up. I could still see a little bit then before I lost the remainder of my sight, so I got the marker, and I start writing on the marker board, and I said, "I'm going to start my own company, and then I'm going to become a millionaire, and then I'm going to write a book, and then they're going to make movies." And, David, I wrote this whole list of stuff, and all of them have come true, just like I'd written it in a movie script, except the last thing. The last thing I wrote was, someday I'm going to find something I care about as much as that little guy cared about those water wells, and I'm going to write a check for $1 million, which is really bold for a blind guy with $7 in his pocket. And that began this 40-year journey, and all of those things happened, and we had a lot of giving projects. We have sent 500 kids to college through the Crusader Scholarship Fund. In order to honor my parents, we did the Stovall Administrative Center, where all the administrative offices are at ORU. We gave money to feed hundreds of thousands of people in Haiti, and a lot of things we've done, but we never really found our thing. Until 3 years ago, I was in a board meeting at Oral Roberts University, and they said, we need to brainstorm, break up into groups, and talk about what you would do, you think we should be doing on this campus in the year 2030. And somebody threw out the thing, we should have a school of entrepreneurship where young people from around the world could get a master's degree or an undergraduate degree in entrepreneurship and start their own companies and create jobs and do all these things. And that idea would not leave me alone, David. And that fall, I called Dr. Wilson, who's now the president of ORU, and I said, can you come over to the house? I want to talk to you about something. And I laid out for him my vision of the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship. And I said, if you like this idea, I'll give you $1 million. And he said, Jim, I got to take it to the trustees and make sure we're clear on this, but I'll come back. 2 weeks later, he's back, and he said, they liked it. He said, in fact, Jim, they loved it. They added some ideas to it, and it's going to cost $2 million. So I said, well, I'll give you the $1 million I promised you, and I'll match the second. I'll give you half of that. And thankfully, the Green family stepped in, and it's an honor to have their money. But what's so much more is that they're the number one entrepreneurial group in our part of the world through Hobby Lobby and all the work they do. So here we are 40 years later. Crystal and I are now backstage in the same chapel. We're getting ready to walk on stage with this giant check for $1.5 million. And they introduced me to a guy backstage there. They said, Jim, this is Dr. Kevin Schneider. He's going to be the executive director. Well, I'd seen his resume, and they'd asked me what I think. He's a very impressive gentleman, and he runs the entire program. And so I said, well, it's a pleasure to meet you. And he said, you really changed my life. And I said, well, Dr. Schneider, I didn't pick you for this role. I think they made a good choice, but, the university administration and Dr. Wilson picked you. And he said, no, you don't understand. 22 years ago, I was an undergrad student, and I was running out of money, and I needed help to finish my education, and you gave me a scholarship. And here we are 22 years later, and I am the director of the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship. So, David, it's a lifelong journey in giving, and it's amazing to see what happens. And every once in a while, this life that seems so chaotic and so random kind of comes together, and you get a little glimpse, and you see this almost divine order to things, and you realize, wow, there really is a plan, and it really does work for me.
So tell us about what takes place. It's open now, the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship, and students can be a part as we speak.
Oh, absolutely. We're finishing up our third year now. We will graduate our first students in May. The kids, we have a launch competition. We just finished our third annual launch competition. It's kind of like Shark Tank, and kids really start real businesses. This is not a game of Monopoly. They start real, amazing businesses. In the first year, one of our students had been to Africa just as COVID was breaking and realized that the people in these poor villages didn't have respirators or ventilators, and even if they did have them, the electricity didn't work half the time, and so it would shut down and people were dying. So they came back, and an entrepreneur student and an engineering student at ORU got together, and they made a ventilator that works off electricity or battery or solar, and it has saved lives. It's approved by the World Health Organization, and they've sold a number of them. They're working, and I mean, you see a number of things like that around there. And we just had our finals last Saturday, and a company that a young man had started called Pet Loose, and everybody's had the experience of your cat or your dog get out and you can't find your pet, and well, he invented a collar that has a GPS thing on it. You can look up on your phone where your dog is. They've had those before, but the problem is the batteries run out in a few hours, and your dog's now completely gone. Well, he came up with a deal for a solar cell on there, and it'll go for weeks, and it'll work off of sunlight or ambient light or street light or anything else. And it's just amazing to see these kids come up with these ideas and launch them in real businesses. Because I always tell the kids, guys, this is not a theoretical thing. 3 of the 5 largest businesses on planet Earth started in somebody's dorm room, so it may as well be yours. And the kids always exceed my wildest expectations.
Well, you just alluded to the fact that you interact with the ORU students who are a part of the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship. How involved are you, Jim?
Well, I have an office there, and I am there for most of the all the launch competitions and the meetings, and we do meetups, and I am there once or twice a week is not unusual for me. And then all the kids have my telephone number and email, and so I am pretty involved. And I always tell the kids, as the scriptures tell us, you have not because you ask not. So they always know where to find me, and they are just amazing, amazing young people from all around the world. I mean, ORU is starting to look like the United Nations. We have students now from 126 nations around the world, and I've had to have my people get out an atlas. There's some of these places I never even heard of.
Well, it is a pleasure to welcome back Jim Stovall to the airwaves of the Oasis Radio Network. Go call family and friends and tell them that he is on the air today on The Road Show. I am David Warren, your host, and when we come back, I want to ask Jim how his spirit of entrepreneurship was birthed. It's a great story, folks. Stay tuned. I'm David Warren here with some exciting news for Oasis listeners. We have a new mobile device app. It's free, easy to download, and lets you enjoy our refreshing music and talk everywhere you go. If you have an Android cell phone, go to the Google Play Store. And if you have an iPhone or iPad, visit the Apple Store and search for Oasis Radio Network. Be an Oasis ambassador and share this news with family and friends around the world. Oasis Network. Back with us on The Road Show is Jim Stovall. I'm David Warren, your host. And back in the day when I was a student at Oral Roberts University, there was a building named after a man named Lee Braxton. I think it was called Braxton Hall. And Jim, it was your father who introduced you to Mr. Braxton, and a lifelong passion for entrepreneurship was birthed in you. Tell us about meeting this very special man.
Well, Lee Braxton was one of the most amazing people I ever knew. And when I got to my senior year of college, and as you remember, all of the recruiters come on campus and they're offering, soon-to-be graduates jobs and various things. And, well, nobody wanted to hire this blind Olympic weightlifter guy. So I realized I'm not going to get a job. So I came up with the only idea. I said, well, I'm going to start my own company. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I didn't even know what that was. Well, my dad worked for ORU for 57 years. He got out of the Navy and as a 24-year-old started working in the mailroom, carrying bags of mail. And when he retired at age 81, he was the chief financial officer. So he ran the gambit. Well, my dad had an office across the street from the university. So late in my senior year, I walked over there and I said, Dad, I got to talk to you. I'm not going to get a job, which is really thrilling for any parent to hear, that I'm not going to go get a job. But I said, I'm going to start a company. And he said, I don't know anything about that, but follow me. I'll introduce you to a guy. He took me out of his office, down the hall in the very next office, and he introduced me to Lee Braxton. Lee Braxton was an elderly little old man. He had grown up during the Depression. He had a third-grade education. He had dropped out of school and started repairing bicycles to help his family. He had become a multimillionaire by the end of the Depression. He gave the majority of his money away. He worked for ORU for $1 a year for the rest of his life and managed his money. He was an amazing entrepreneur, and he taught me everything I know about being an entrepreneur. And what's ironic about it is, as you mentioned, there was a Braxton's Hall there, and now Crystal and I have our name on 2 buildings on campus. And at that time, if you'd have told me my name was going to be on a building on the campus, it would have involved a can of spray paint or something, because I could not imagine that. But what's amazing is the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship is actually in that building where I met Lee Braxton. The university sold that building, and it went through several hands, and then somebody bought it and donated it back to the university. And when I told Dr. Wilson I want to start the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship, he said, we've just acquired this building. And he didn't realize I'd grown up in that building. That's where my father worked. And so when my mom and dad came to the opening of the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship, I said, we're only about 80 feet away from where you introduced me to Lee Braxton. It only took me 40 years to get here, So, we lost my mom 2 years ago, but my father, he's age 90, and he lives there at University Village, just on the other side of campus, and he can look out his window and see the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship, and sits on his back deck and thinks about the way things are as opposed to the way things used to be.
That is so wonderful. So tell us about what you and Lee Braxton would do together, how you would spend your time.
Well, when I first went to him, my dad introduced me, and man, he was a gruff old man. He made it real clear he didn't care that much about me. He said, I got some respect for your father. It's why I'm going to spend some time with you. And he gave me a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And he said, can you still read? I said, barely. It's not easy. He said, I don't care about that. He said, read this book. And I read the whole book, and I came back a week later, and he asked me a question, and he said, go read that book again. So I read it again, and here I am a week later, and he asked the question. He said, go read it again. It took 3 times before I gave him the answer I guess he was looking for. And that book, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, kind of became the basis for all of our work together. And since then, I've written several books about Napoleon Hill and been in a movie featuring his life's work and a documentary we did. And I wrote about that experience in a book I wrote called The Millionaire Map, about my journey from poverty to prosperity. And I wrote about Lee Braxton. Well, the head of the Napoleon Hill Foundation, Don Green, called me. I'd never met this guy. I didn't even know there was a Napoleon Hill Foundation. And he said, loved your book and loved what you said about Napoleon Hill. He said, did you realize your mentor, Lee Braxton, was Napoleon Hill's best friend? He said he did the eulogy at Hill's funeral in 1970.
Wow.
And I had no idea. And Don Green sent me a 2-inch thick file of letters that Lee Braxton and Napoleon Hill exchanged in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And, it's just an amazing connection. And Lee Braxton taught me everything. And, some of I was very young then, and he was quite elderly, so a lot of our lessons were like a fire hose. He told me, he said, son, I'm too old and you're too stupid, so just listen, and someday this will make sense to you. And even all these years later, I still am in situations periodically, and I realize, oh, that's what he was talking about.
Well, anybody on the motivational speaking circuit will refer to Napoleon Hill's masterpiece, Think and Grow Rich, as the quintessential must-read for anybody wanting to improve his or her life. What is so special about this book? What's in the book?
Well, it's different than any other book, and everybody that's ever written a motivational or a personal development or success-oriented book owes a debt of gratitude to Napoleon Hill. Napoleon Hill was born in the 1880s, a very poor area of Virginia, and he became a newspaper reporter. He was there the day the Wright brothers flew and reported on that, and he was actually the first one to go up in the plane after Orville and Wilbur. And so he reported on all of that, and then they sent him on an assignment to go interview Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie was the richest man in the world. He had started U.S. Steel. So Hill goes to this mansion to interview Andrew Carnegie for the newspaper, and he asked him the question probably you and I would ask. He said, how do you get rich? And Carnegie said, no one has ever really quantified that, the science of success. But if you'll dedicate the next 20 years of your life to it, you'll be the one that unlocks that door. And Hill took the challenge, and Carnegie introduced Napoleon Hill to 500 of the most successful people of the day: Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, J.C. Penney, all of these amazing, amazing people. And their stories or their lessons became the basis for Think and Grow Rich. And so it's not a theory. It's not somebody's idea. It's not somebody's concept. These are, it's actual, this is what people did, and it's very scientific, and I highly recommend next to the scriptures, if you're only going to read one book, read Think and Grow Rich. And there's a great movie called Think and Grow Rich: The Legacy, and please overlook the fact that I'm one of the 8 or 10 people that do the commentary within it, but it is some amazing stuff. It is commentary on his work as well as little vignettes of Thomas Edison and Henry Ford and Marconi that invented the medium we're talking on right now, radio. So a lot of just amazing breakthroughs.
Jim Stovall is our guest today, and he has a new book out called The Gift of Giving, subtitled Living Your Legacy. And Jim, you wrote in the book, what is often missed in conversations about Napoleon Hill is that although his science of success is useful for building financial riches, the true aim of his achievement philosophy is creating the emotional and spiritual wealth that comes from living a meaningful existence. Add value to yourself, yes, but do so in order to add value to the lives of others. And then you write about yourself, Jim. While I gave much thought and planning to amassing financial riches, along the way I stopped calculating my wealth based on the amount of money I had accumulated and started defining my wealth by the things it could do for other people. Was there a defining moment in your process there? When did you make the shift from earning money being your goal to how you could help others?
Well, I started out as, I told Crystal, we're not poor. Poor people can't get this far in debt. I don't know what we were when we started out. But I thought life was about going from poverty to prosperity. And once we got there, I realized we're only halfway there. We're at the top of one mountain, but I can see the real summit right over there. And it's about going from poverty to prosperity to purpose. And, a part of every dollar we get, we should spend and enjoy and take care of our necessities today. A part of it we should save or invest for the future. And a third part of it we should give away. I don't care how much or how little money you have. You should give away part of it all the time, because I've heard from a lot of people, once I get rich, I'll be a giver. No, you won't, because you never have enough. You're caught up in this disease of more, and when you do that, you can be a billionaire and you still don't have enough money. But once you start becoming a giver, it's the most fun you'll ever have with money, and it is the most meaningful thing you do.
Jim Stovall is with us today. We're talking about his new book, The Gift of Giving. And as I mentioned earlier, Napoleon Hill's science of success is not to build financial riches for oneself, but to add value to yourself in order to add value to the lives of others. We're going to pick that back up when we come back.
I'm Karen Jensen Salisbury, one of the hosts you hear on the Oasis Network Roadshow. For 35 years, this 1 hour of the day has inspired and motivated you, our listeners, with thousands of stories of people whose lives demonstrate the truth that with God, all things are possible. It's an hour that you should make a part of your day, Monday through Friday, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Central. The Roadshow, an Oasis Network presentation.
Here's a little bit about today's guest, Jim Stovall. He has enjoyed success as an author, athlete, investment broker, and entrepreneur while dealing with the challenge of blindness. During his remarkable life, Jim has been a national champion Olympic weightlifter as well as the author of more than 30 books. As co-founder and president of the Emmy Award-winning Narrative Television Network, or NTN, Jim has also helped make movies and television accessible for America's 13 million blind and visually impaired people and their families. I'm David Warren, your host on today's program, and we're talking about one of his newer books, The Gift of Giving, subtitled Living Your Legacy. And Jim, you talk a lot about Napoleon Hill and his influence on your life based on his book, Think and Grow Rich. And within your book, you list Napoleon Hill's 12 great riches of life. And I just thought I would list them, and maybe we'll touch on a couple of these. First of all, a positive mental attitude. Second, sound physical health. Number 3, harmony in human relationships. 4, freedom from all forms of fear. 5, the hope of future achievement. 6, the capacity for faith. Number 7 is a willingness to share one's blessings. 8, a labor of love as an occupation. 9, an open mind on all subjects. 10, self-discipline in all circumstances. Number 11 is the capacity to understand others. And finally, the last one of the great riches of life, according to Napoleon Hill, is sufficient money. Do you find it interesting, Jim, that he put that in last place?
No, I think money is a result of other things. You know, people who just get up in the morning and say, I want to be rich, or I want to have more money, or I need money, they're like the guy standing in front of the fireplace saying, give me some heat, and then I'll throw in some wood later. It doesn't work like that. Money is a result of doing all these other things. You know, people, I have 10 million books in print now among over 50 titles, and my phone number and email address is in all of them, so I hear from countless people. And people say, well, I want to make money. Well, I tell them, here's the bad news. The only people that make money, they work at the United States Mint. They print dollars. They make money. The rest of us have to earn money, and the only way you earn money is by creating value in the lives of other people. There's no other way to do that. And so, it does not surprise me. It should be the last thing. It's like, if you're a farmer, the last thing you do is you harvest, and you go sell your harvest, and you get money. But back in the spring, when you start plowing and planting and fertilizing and all the things you do, those are things you have to do, and then the result is a harvest, and then the result of that harvest is you have some money. So it is and should be the last thing.
Well, this whole concept of realignment of values is something that you have turned into a career beyond the narrative television network. Many, if not most, of your books and movies are based on this realignment of values, not having money or earning money being in first place.
Yeah, it seems to be a theme. Part of it is in order to get people to look at truth in our world today in the 21st century, in order to get their attention, you have to deal with what I call the big lie. And the big lie, David, tells us if I just had enough money, all my other problems would go away. And that's just quite simply not true. In fact, if you're a person that creates problems or disharmony or bad relationships, if you have money, you'll be able to do more of that. Money makes you more of whatever you are. If you're a giving, loving, caring person, you'll be able to do more of that if you have more money. But if you're the opposite of that, money will ruin you and ruin those around you.
I think of your movie based on the book, The Ultimate Gift, as you speak here.
Yeah, The Ultimate Gift really tells that story. And I had thought of that story before I made the hero a billionaire, because most of those principles came from, my parents and my grandparents. I learned them that way. If everyone had had the privilege of being raised the way I was, I'd have to do something else to make a living. And these are just things that I thought were natural order of life things. But then in order to dispel the big lie, I made him a billionaire and showed how, he had all these problems and the gift of work and money and friends and love and family. Those are the things that made his life meaningful, not the billions of dollars.
Well, in your new book, The Gift of Giving, there is a Napoleon Hill quote in the chapter on prudent financial management, and it is this: tell me how you use your spare time and how you spend your money, and I will tell you where you will be in 10 years from now. We've already talked about you spending money on the new Stovall Center at Oral Roberts University, Jim, plus, of course, the scholarships you've given over the years to the many college students. But let's talk about how you spend time helping others. That is such a valuable commodity, especially for a man like you with so many irons in the fire. How do you spend your time helping others?
Well, I rarely just give money to a project. I like to get involved and leverage my money with my time, my effort, my energy, which is why you'll find me at the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship and why I get involved with the other projects I can. And I get paid a ridiculous amount of money to go to arenas and speak to thousands of people. But for every one of those I do for money, I do one for free. So I will go out and instead of speaking to 20,000 people in an arena, I'll be in a third grade class somewhere, or I'll be at a nursing home, or I'll be at somebody's Bible study, or whatever it might be. And those I find to be very meaningful. So, in the beginning of our life, we sometimes have a lot of time and no money, so we can give away more of our time. And later in our life, we have a lot of money but no time. But you want to make sure that you're always giving away part of your time and part of your money, because Churchill may have said it best, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give.
So you have to, on purpose, be proactive about not only giving money, but giving your time. So you've already predetermined that.
Yeah, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is giving money to everybody that calls you and asks for money. Just like when people call you, I don't know about you, I get these people, they know when I'm eating dinner at my house, I think. So they always call when Crystal and I are sitting down to eat dinner, and they either want me to give money or buy something. And that's a bad reason to do either of those, because someone called you. That what you should do is think, what matters to me? What's important to me? Where can I leverage my time and money? Where does my expertise allow me to do that? Like for a guy like you, David, I mean, you could go hand out food or trays at the food center. That'd be a wonderful thing for you to do. A wonderful thing. But if you can go somewhere where you can use your voice and your talent and the gifts that people are listening to you utilize right now, all of a sudden you're worth a lot more money. If you're a physician, you can help people dig ditches, and that'll be nice. But if you can use the skill and the talent you've been given to serve others, all of a sudden it becomes a leveraged thing. So for me, I donate books. The book you're talking about right now, The Gift of Giving, all the royalties from that book are donated. I don't get a dime off that book, and I'm really excited about it. I mean, that's why I'm thrilled to talk about it, because for me, books are things I do. So it's a way to give part of myself away.
Jim, something that I do, of course, I believe in giving the tithe and, of course, offerings above the tithe. And our audience is familiar with what I'm speaking about. That has to do with money. But then we also need to be just as accountable with our time. And something that I do that I picked up from Dr. Stan Toller, a great man, is that he and now I will not end a day without doing 5 different outreaches or giving to others of myself before I call it a day. But I have to keep myself accountable, or it's just easier to give money to the Lord and to ministries than give myself. And you say in your book that the best way to love people is to help them better their own lives. So find a need and fill the need. What do you say?
Yeah, it really makes a difference. And I am excited about projects that help people to help others. I tell the young people at the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship, I mean, the reason I put my name on that, and most of the things I do, David, I don't put my name on. The people, well, when we opened the Stovall Administrative Center, there was a reporter there, and he said, "Are you just one of these rich guys that want your name on everything?" And I said, "No." I said, "If you go look at the plaque, this is dedicated to my parents. They happen to have the same name I do, but this is about them, not me." But the reason my name's on the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship is I want these kids and future generations to know one day there was a student just like them, broke and scared, and in my case, going blind, and I made $1 million commitment. And I told him what I'm looking for in the next 20 years of my life. I am 63 years old. So by the time I'm in my 80s, I still hope to be there and working, and I am looking for 50 kids a year to come through there and make a commitment. Yeah, I'll at some point in my life, I'll give $1 million. I'll create a business. I'll give $1 million. And I don't care if they give it to ORU. I don't care if they give it to their church or a local community or whatever they decide to do with it. Just be open and be a giver. And if I can do that, 50 a year over the 20 years, that'll be 1,000 of them, and 1,000 million is $1 billion. So in my lifetime, that $1 I was going to give turns into $1 billion in giving. And if I can do that, by the time I'm 83 years old, I'll call it a good day.
I love it. Well, the book, The Gift of Giving, by today's guest, Jim Stovall, is available wherever books are sold. You can also listen to the book. That's how I did it, Jim. I flipped through the paper book here, but then I also listened to your book on Audible, so people can check that out. Audible.com is where you can listen to The Gift of Giving, but again, the physical paperback book is available wherever books are sold. And let me go ahead and give the website for today's guest, jimstovall.com, JIMSTOVALL.com. And if memory serves me correctly, the website for Oral Roberts University is oru.edu, so you can check out more about the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship. The final section of Jim's book, The Gift of Giving, subtitled Living Your Legacy, is a section called Your Giving Challenge. So beyond the 1,000 ORU students that Jim wants to see give $1 million over these next 20 years to create $1 billion of giving, well, he also wants to encourage you and me to be givers as well. So we'll talk about this section of the book when we come back on the final segment. David Warren here, Jim Stovall, standing by for more. I'm David Warren, Program Director at Oasis Radio Network and one of the hosts of this podcast. All of our hosts enjoy hearing from you, our listening family, so drop us a note. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and you'll receive new episodes on your mobile devices. And now, back to the show. On today's program, it has been such a pleasure to have back with us, this time by phone, Jim Stovall. And we've been talking about his book, The Gift of Giving. And before we took our final break there, Jim had touched on the fact that he wants to see 1,000 of the ORU students who are a part of the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship commit to give $1 million to whatever warms their heart, just like it did Jim 40 years ago, and then that would create $1 billion worth of giving. But Jim, a lot of us here are either graduates of ORU or just people that need to be giving of themselves, both in their money and time. So it might not be $1 million, but maybe we shouldn't limit ourselves, and we should think like these entrepreneurial students at ORU. What do you say?
Well, I think, Crystal and I, our first financial goal was to get out of debt. That was a big hole. We got out of debt. Then our next financial goal was to accumulate money. But for the last 15, 20 years, our financial goals are how much are we going to give away? And, I really had always had that $1 million challenge in my mind, and it turned into $1.5 million. But, David, it never stops. It's an ongoing thing. I mean, the year after, I'll never forget, Crystal and I left the chapel that day. We'd given away $1.5 million. And that's by far the biggest amount of money we ever spent at one point. And we get in the car and we're getting ready to leave. And I said, how do you feel? She said, I've never felt richer than I do right now. I said, me too. So I thought, let's do it again. And, at the end of that year, we'd given away $1.5 million, but our investments and our businesses and everything else, we had more money than we did when we started the year. So I got to thinking about it, and I do a lot of consulting for companies around the world, and one of them is a company in New York that buys consolidated debt. They buy consumer debt from people. And I was up there for a meeting with them one time, and I said, could you segregate out just medical debt? And they said, yeah. And I said, would you sell it to me? And they said, Jim, you're our consultant. You're not going to get in competition with us. I said, no. I want to buy $1 million of medical debt. And he said, okay. So they put together a package of $1 million in medical debt, 1,184 families, David. And he said, what do you want me to do with it? And I said, write them all a letter and tell them they're forgiven, every one of them. And They did that, and I said, look, the last thing I want you to do, I don't want to call 1,184 people, but I'd like to call a dozen families. And David, it's another one of those plateau moments where the fog clears and you look back in the chaos of where you've been. The first guy on the list is an African-American truck driver from Valdosta, Georgia, and I called the number. And I said, sir, you probably got a letter recently saying that your medical debt had been paid off. He said, we sure did. I said, well, I'm the one that sent it to you. And I just wanted to call and let you know I'm thinking about you. I'm believing that you'll have better days ahead. And I just want you to know that I'm glad this has happened for you, and I hope that you'll be able to help other people. Well, he was thanking me and being very gracious. And then I could hear on his end of the line someone had come into the room where he was. And he said, I'm on the phone. This is the man that paid for April's eyes. And he came back on, and I said, what was that? And he said, my wife came home, and I was telling her that you're the guy that paid for our debt. And I said, no, tell me about April's eyes. And he said, well, April's our little girl, and she was born with this serious eye condition, and she needed these 3 surgeries, and our insurance paid for the first one and part of the second one, but it ran out. It maxed out our insurance, and they wouldn't do the third one until we paid for all of the second one. And she was losing her sight, and we were afraid it was going to be permanent. And he said, I was working 2 jobs. My wife was. We sold everything we had, and we just weren't getting there. And then I got your letter, and then my little girl just had the surgery, and he said, Mr. Stovall, you'll never understand what it means to save somebody's eyesight. And I said, sir, someday I'm going to come to Valdosta, Georgia, and I want to meet your April, and you can tell me all about it.
Wow. That was just one of the ones you called. Can you tell us another one?
Yeah, I mean, most of them were not that dramatic. Most of them were people that just couldn't believe that a stranger who never knew them, never will again, and I'm just somebody that was sent them a letter or a voice on the phone. And, they asked, why would you do this for me? And I said, to be honest, I probably did it for me. I'm glad it's helping you, but I did it because I want to be a giver. And I hope you will start thinking about that, and you can become a giver. And, the great thing about it is, in order to be a giver, you have to go from poverty to prosperity and beyond. So, a funny thing happens when you start to be a giver. You find out that you've got more than enough because you're giving it away. And it's an amazing goal to set, and it's an amazing way to live your life.
Your new book is The Gift of Giving that we've discussed today. The subtitle is Living Your Legacy. And I like that you did not say leaving your legacy. You said living your legacy. In other words, don't just will it all away when you die. Start now. Start giving now. Isn't that the whole premise of this book?
Yeah, I think so. When you understand our free enterprise capitalistic system, it should be a crime to live in poverty, but it should also be a crime to die with riches. You ought to live with a lot of money and give it all away. And, that's what Andrew Carnegie said. Shame on you if you leave, millions of dollars that are to be given away then. Give them away while you're alive. And Warren Buffett wrote about that with his kids. He said, I want to leave my kids money, but I'm going to give most of it away. He said, I want to leave them enough so they can do anything, but I don't want to leave them enough so they can do nothing. They're going to have to go do something in their life. And I think that's an important thing. So, money's a tool, and when you share your tools with other people, you can really change the world.
Sounds like he saw your movie, The Ultimate Gift. Warren Buffett.
In fact, I know he has. I happen to be very, very grateful to be one of his shareholders, and I bought into his company only so I could go to his annual stockholders meeting, and it turns out to be one of the better investments I ever made. He has definitely seen the movie and read the book.
Well, if you, the listener, did not hear the front of this interview, it is archived, so you can enjoy it in its entirety. But Jim and I talked about the new Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship, which is now open at Oral Roberts University. And Jim, I wish that there were 3 people living on Earth that could see that Stovall Center, one being Oral Roberts, one being Lee Braxton, and another being Napoleon Hill. I'm sure it would make all three of these men very, very proud. But I am glad that your parents were able to tour the new facility. Tell us about that day.
Well, it was an amazing day. Steve Forbes did a satellite feed and talked about it, and all the congressmen and the various people were there. But just to have Mom and Dad there was an amazing thing, and they were part of this journey. And and I thought about Mr. Braxton that day, and of course Napoleon Hill. But this last fall, I was inducted into our home state of Oklahoma, our Hall of Fame, and when they have people like Will Rogers and Mickey Mantle and Paul Harvey and Oral Roberts. But when they inducted me, my dad went, and he had just had his 90th birthday. And I said, Dad, the only regret I have is that Mom's not here. And he said, son, she knew about this long before you and I did. And I feel the same way about Mr. Braxton and Napoleon Hill. We are indeed spiritual beings having a human experience, and I think certainly those people are a huge part of our reality then and now.
Jim, one of the things that you do in all of your books is you do something which astounds most people. You publish your phone number and personal email in the books. So has that been a good thing throughout the years?
It's been an amazing thing. As I mentioned, I have 10 million books in print in 36 languages, so we hear from people all around the world. And, it's very gratifying to hear from people that the messages change. But I have people that answer the phone around the clock, and they always know where to find me. So I do get calls on occasion in the middle of the night from seriously distressed people. And the people who man the phones are good enough to say, Jim, I'm going to patch them through to you. And while they are getting some authorities to come and help this person in Seattle or Kuala Lumpur or Sydney, Australia, or wherever they happen to be. But it has been an amazing experience to get to talk to the people that read my books and watch my movies, because that's something that very few authors or screenwriters ever have the privilege of. And I just started doing it 50 books ago, and it's been an amazing ride. And for your listeners right now, 918-627-1000 and Jim at jimstovall.com, and you will hear back from me. I take that very, very seriously, because early in my career, people like Lee Braxton and Robert Schuller and Steve Forbes and amazing people stepped up and spoke into my life. And not that I'm one of them, but I certainly can be available for people that take the time to read my books or watch the movies.
Well, it has been a wonderful hour once again with you, Jim, this time talking about your book, The Gift of Giving, Living Your Legacy. We didn't really go into it, but people can pick up the book and read about your giving challenge. There are questions to answer and a challenge from the co-authors Jim Stovall, today's guest, and Don Green, who is the head of the Napoleon Hill Foundation. This book is available wherever books are sold. It is also available in Audible form or audiobook on the website audible.com. And if you want to check out more about today's guest, the website is jimstovall.com. There are 2 L's in Stovall, JIMSTOVALL.com. His email address, once again, is jim at jimstovall.com. And the number that I called today, and you can call too, is 918-627-1000. Jim, you're a giver, and we love it. We love you. Thanks for giving of your time today to the Oasis.
Always appreciate it, and I look forward to our next time together, my friend.
I do too. Well, for Jim Stovall, I'm David Warren, and it's been another great Road Show.
You've been listening to The Road Show. If you'd like to write to us, here's our address. The Road Show, P.O. Box 1924, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 74101. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. The views of today's guest aren't necessarily those of this station, but we do appreciate and thank our guest for spending this time with us. The Road Show, an Oasis Network presentation.